No. Good evening and welcome. We're about to start really what is a historic program here in Washington, D.C., and for everyone who's joining us online tonight. I'm Sarah Flounders, a coordinator of the Sanctions Kill campaign. I'll be co-chairing tonight's event with Jill Clark-Golub of the America Without Sanctions. And really, Jill, in so many ways, is the real organizer of tonight. But we want to open this program. We're really honored that Reverend William Lamar, who is a pastor here at the Metropolitan AME Church, is going to give us a welcoming. So please give Reverend Lamar a warm welcome. Thank you.
I want to welcome you all home. Welcome. Where we are today is a holy place. This is the oldest continuously owned parcel of property by persons of African descent in the capital of the American Empire. I want to thank you for being present. There is much history here that calls us to a Sankofa energy. For those of you who are not familiar with that term, S-A-N-K-O-F-A, Sankofa. It is an Adinkra symbol and a philosophy that speaks to going forward while looking back. The language from which it emerges, Sankofa, literally means to go back and fetch it. And I think it's important for us to realize tonight that the work that we are doing is an extension of work that began generations ago. That we are in a fight, we are joyful warriors because we know the world as it is not the world as it ought be or as it can be. And so because at Metropolitan we believe in the ongoing presence of ancestors, I want to ask you now to call the names of ancestors in this work. There may be persons whom we may know, there may be persons whom we may not know, but let us pause now to call the names of ancestors in this work whose continued presence gives us energy, joy, and companionship. Would you call the names of those ancestors where you are? I was speaking with Austin earlier about the fact that many Black organizations surrendered their international critique in order to do politics in the empire. They had an immediate goal, and that was the ending of segregation and other things. And the compromise they made was to get out of the work of internationalism. But you cannot get out of that work without harming yourself. I want to remind you that Frederick Douglass, who worshiped here, while here, not only fought for the liberation of his own people, but participated in fighting the Chinese Exclusion Act. I want to remind you that America's greatest socialist, A. Philip Randolph, was funeralized in this church and was a part of our own tradition. And our own tradition has left its radicality, but we are returning to it in many places and outposts. And as we prepare for tonight, I just want to leave us with a few words, hopefully to inspire us and to remind us of our best selves. First, from someone who was no friend of liberty at all, and who actually was one who fought alongside the apartheid regime to keep its white supremacist violence as the political order of the day, Samuel Huntington, who worked in the Carter administration. Let's be clear that American imperialism exists on both sides of the aisle. He said the West was won not by the superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but by its superiority in applying organized violence. And sanctions are organized violence. That is the world in which we find ourselves, and that's what we fight. Imawar, who wrote a book called How to Hide an Empire, says something that we need to hear tonight. The British weren't confused as to whether there was a British Empire. They had a holiday, Empire Day, to celebrate it. France did not forget that Algeria was French. It is only the United States that has suffered from chronic confusion about its being an empire. And finally, from the great Edward Said, one of the ancestors whose name I call tonight, he wrote, "Every empire, however, tells itself and the world that it is unlike all other empires, that its mission is not to plunder and control, but to educate and liberate." The Cubans know better. Those in the Philippines know better. We know better. Thank you for being here. Let's work together to build a world that can exist if we continue as joyful resistors and fighters and creators of the new world. Thank you.
Just a quick announcement in Spanish for those listening and who need interpretation. Para los que necesitan escuchar la interpretación al español, pueden ir a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom para ver las opciones de más, o si ven un globo terráqueo, allí pueden escoger interpretación y después el idioma en que desean escuchar, o sea, el español. Gracias. And now I think we're ready to hear from the Black Workers and Wellness Center chorus. It has a number for us.
How are you? My name is Amina Mohammed Mbake, and I'm with the Black Worker and Wellness Center Chorus. We are a chorus that is based in Southeast Washington, D.C. at the Black Workers and Wellness Center. We've been around since about 2017, and we come out about 2 or 3 times a month to support people in their demonstrations and their struggle around issues that we deeply support. So would like to thank you for having us this evening.
You have the
Yeah, so we would like to start with a song for Palestine, being a big issue nowadays, but also to sing for all the people who is not having access to water, to food, to shelter. And we would love you to sing with us.
Palestine needs her freedom.
needs her freedom.
Palestine
Palestine
needs our love.
needs our love.
Palestine
Palestine
needs her freedom.
needs her freedom.
Palestine
Palestine
needs our love.
needs our love.
If you think of the Middle East, you can't help but say, Palestine. People there have lost their homes. Some have lost their land. Palestine
Palestine
needs her freedom.
needs her freedom.
Palestine
Palestine
needs our love.
needs our love.
Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love.
Seems to me no answer that give us the reason why people cannot live, so no one has to die. Let's take a stand for freedom. Let's take a stand for truth. Let's take a stand for justice. That's what we've got to do. 'Cause Palestine
Needs her freedom.
Needs her freedom.
Palestine needs our love.
Needs our love.
Palestine needs her freedom.
Needs her freedom.
Palestine needs our love.
Needs our love. People there are rich. People there are poor. Some have education. What are they fighting for? Fighting for their freedom. Fighting for their land. Fighting for their children. Let's help them take a stand. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs our freedom. Palestine needs our love. People of all countries, of every race and breed, we need a new beginning. Let's help them plant the seed. Plant the seeds of love. Let that love seed grow. Plant the seed for everyone, so all the world will know. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love.
Thank you, and keep planting that seed of freedom, seed of love, and seed of revolution.
Thank you again, and that was a Black Workers and Wellness Center chorus. Just in opening tonight's program from the Sanctions Kill campaign, we've focused a great deal of time and energy over years into exposing the horrific weapon of mass starvation, disease, hyperinflation, societal collapse as a weapon of US policy. Sanctions, also called economic coercive measures, or as Reverend Lamar just said, organized violence, impact more than 40 sanctioned countries around the world. A third of the world population is in a country being sanctioned, starved, strangled by US policy. And it's an all-out effort to destabilize, recolonize the developing world, the global South. It's a cause that millions are forced to migrate, desperately seeking relief. Tonight, we'll be focusing on the thousands of US sanctions on the Americas, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. But we can't focus anywhere in the world without first raising our total solidarity with Palestine and the heroic resistance. 14 months and stretching 75 years. It's truly a genocide by every standard, and yet it's a condemnation that's totally disregarded. War on Gaza, the West Bank, totally funded and equipped by the US, and it continues because US imperialism is in full support of these Zionist crimes, Democrats and Republicans, and they have been for decades, despite a global solidarity of historic proportions. Long before October 7th, in the Sanctions Kill campaign, we focused on the US-Israeli sanctions on Gaza as a form of all-out war. Since 2006, when the people of Gaza dared to elect Hamas as their government. Now, US wars and sanctions today are a stranglehold on Palestine, also on Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen. Actually, the largest number of US sanctions are on the countries of Africa. And this is true from Libya to Zimbabwe, from Sudan, South Sudan, and Mali, and so many other countries. This is US policy of strangulation. But this week we see in the most gruesome detail the impact of 21 years of US sanctions on Syria. Once a prosperous, modern country with zero foreign debt, with free healthcare, free education, including university, subsidized food, modern infrastructure, because they had oil resources, they were a breadbasket, and always a strong defender of Palestine. And this was the crime for which US imperialism and Israel targeted them. In 2003, when the US invaded Iraq, they imposed rounds of sanctions on neighboring Syria, bringing hyperinflation, shortages, government workers, soldiers, teachers, medical salaries became worthless, not worth a dollar. And that's fertile soil for a well-funded opposition that blames everything on the government and never mentions US sanctions. And this exploded, this opposition, with US help and funding in 2011, an uprising called the Arab Spring. Now, we've seen the same tactics used in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, haven't we? All also rich countries, potentially, and resource rich, and with great determination and energy. We've seen the US-funded mercenaries and what they can do. Now in Syria, it was really an alliance with Al-Qaeda and ISIS that surged into Syria, all with US and funding also from Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And it was funded to tear Syria apart with wild propaganda and the greatest amount of violence. And the Western media was with this heart and soul. It was years of US bombing, destroying all possible infrastructure. The solidarity of Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran and Russia helped save Syria and at great cost regain control of the cities. But a third of Syria remained under US and Turkish control through mercenary gangs. And this was the oil and resource-rich areas, the agricultural breadbasket. And it was held by US bases in Syria and still in Iraq today, and US trainers and contractors in Jordan. It's a vicious policy. And the years of no heat, little electricity, old weapons, demoralization can take hold, and the lines can collapse. Right now, the US is bombing Syria relentlessly. Last night, today as we meet, hundreds of bombing runs. Why? Why? Isn't the government, they say, defeated? Hasn't the Syrian Arab army dissolved? Why this massive destruction? The US wants to ensure that nothing can be rebuilt. No supplies, no material, certainly no material to war-torn Lebanon either. It's an all-out effort to demoralize and divide the Palestinian resistance. Now, as we meet, Israeli tanks are on the outskirts of Damascus. It's an all-out invasion. That's what the media means when they say this is free Syria. This is Israeli-occupied, US-occupied Syria. We are confident that the resistance will be reborn, as it has time and time again in the past. Think how many times the Palestinian movement has reasserted itself after horrific setbacks. Because under imperialism, there's no solution. So there's only the choice of resistance. So what does all of this mean? It means for everyone listening here today, for everyone meeting here tonight, we need to escalate our solidarity with the sanctioned countries of the Americas, with the sanctioned countries around the world, because the threat is real. It's real. The impact of these sanctions, it's cumulative. It can wear a country down. And then you ask, how could the resistance break in 10 days? It's 13 years, nonstop of war and 22 years of sanctions. So I'll just conclude by saying that we're really honored tonight. We're going to hear from representatives of the sanctioned countries of the Americas. Tonight, Cuban representative, Cuban mission is under harassment. They'll speak by Zoom. Venezuela, the US closed their embassy, their right to be represented right here. They'll speak by Zoom. And we're also very honored that Nicaragua's ambassador is able to be here with us, Ambassador Sandino. So this is a program that we're very honored to put on. It means we need to renew our determination, our solidarity, not take any struggle or any country for granted. We got to learn just how great the pressure and the repression is. I'm going to turn this over to Jill Clark Gottlieb, who is the coordinator of Americas Without Sanctions, who is also a co-chair of tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and everyone who is present with us here in Frederick Douglass Hall. I want to encourage you to see the exhibit that we're very honored to have here. We thank Dr. Wasad for bringing us the Doctors Against Genocide exhibit. It's very educational and including the 10 stages of genocide. And I also invite you to consider making a donation to Doctors Against Genocide. for their help is to send medicines and medical supplies to Gaza, sponsor Gaza medical students, and support other projects. So tonight, we are not only going to hear about the harms caused by U.S. economic coercive measures, but also about the people-centered human rights upheld by the governments of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And I also want to invite you to engage with our other activities this week. We have a new petition to Congress that is for the incoming Congress, and we encourage you to sign and share the petition. Those who are in the room can use the QR code at the registration table to do so if you haven't already signed. Those online, I hope someone will share the link. And also tomorrow, we will be delivering that petition, paper copies of that petition to several congressional offices. And if you are able to join us starting at 1 p.m. in the Rayburn House office building, please look for Cindy Farquhar. If Cindy could raise her hand, and we'll be sure to get your contact information so we can be in touch for organizing on the Hill tomorrow. And I'd like to invite Brianna Ramos to raise her hand. She's our lead on our protest at the White House to take Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. And then, of course, please engage with our social media presence. We have a group of very dedicated scholars and social media activists. We're putting together some good information about both sanctions on Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, and also the positive developments in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. So with this, I'd like to turn the floor now over to our first speaker, who is Austin Cole. Austin Cole is part of the leadership of the Black Alliance for Peace, and he is the coordinator of the Regional Planning Committee of the Zone of Peace. You have the floor, Austin.
Hello, everybody. Today is a day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. The first time I ever spoke publicly was at an AME church when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, reading from the Bible. So it's a joy to be here today. Buenas noches a todos y gracias por estarme aquí para presentar. It's an honor to be here with you all, to be asked to speak on this important day, Human Rights Day 2024. My name is Austin Cole, and first, maybe most importantly, I am the son of parents from the Mississippi Delta in Birmingham, Alabama. I was raised by my mother, my sisters, and my grandma Pat, Leola Patterson, who I think I can say was a cherished member of this congregation of Metropolitan AME Church. So I've been in this building as a newborn, as a teenager, and now here today as a young adult as well as an adult. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Lamar, for having me as well. And then second, as Jill mentioned, I am been sort of the de facto co-coordinator for the Zone of Peace campaign, and I'm one of the co-coordinators for the Haiti Americas team of the Black Alliance for Peace. And so before I get into things, let me start by saying that after 430 days of accelerated genocide in Gaza and 76 years of ongoing Nakba in Palestine, I want to acknowledge the deep grief that many of us are feeling. I want to honor the hundreds and thousands of martyrs, and I want to give gratitude for the bravery and the resistance of the Palestinian people, the Lebanese, Yemeni, Iraqi, Syrian, Iranian people, and the resistance. I also want to name that many of our comrades right now in Cuba are suffering a genocidal economic campaign in their home. They're being starved, denied power, attacked psychologically, dehumanized, yet they also stand resistant and resilient as they drop on the 66th year of the Cuban Revolution. So what am I here to talk about? First, the Zone of Peace. So we launched the Zone of Peace campaign in April 2023 to build a popular, people-centered call for collective struggle to end systemic oppression of imperialism, capitalism, militarism, patriarchy, and white supremacy in our region. And so as part of this campaign, we have 6 core demands. First, dismantle Southcom, the US Southern Command that's militarizing the entire region. End US NATO militarism in the Americas. Disband the US state-sponsored terrorist training facilities like WINSEC, or formerly the School of the Americas. Oppose military intervention into Haiti. Return Guantanamo to Cuba and end all forms of colonialism in the Americas. And then last, and why we're here today, end imperialist sanctions and unilateral coercive measures. And so our current program and our current programmatic focuses are really twofold. One, building out what we call the US Out of Our Americas network. And this is a mass-based network of social movements, popular organizations, labor organizations throughout the region, solidarity coalitions that we are trying to bring together so that they can coordinate together collectively and autonomously, as well as conscious individuals, to struggle for peace, right? And then secondly, to build a collective and growing consciousness as well as popular struggle against the expansion of militarization in this region through the US Southern Command, or Southcom, because it's with that military force that the US is able to enforce these illegal unilateral coercive measures. So to get into it and return to that sixth demand, end imperialist sanctions and unilateral coercive measures, let me clearly state that sanctions, as well as unilateral coercive measures, are war, right? Sanctions are war. Everybody say it with me now. Sanctions are war. All of us in this room likely understand this. But it's critical that we name it and continue to name the fact that the United States, NATO, and their Western axis of domination are in an undeclared war with most of the global South, as well as those of us here that are colonized within the United States. And in particular, the four nations that we are here to support: Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Palestine. This focus on sanctions is critical. And I know that we're going to hear from some wonderful speakers from these nations who will share better perspectives. So what I want to do is draw out a couple of connections and add some framing around economic warfare and its goals of disrupting and destroying sovereignty in order to reinforce the US, EU, NATO global dominance and exploitation. So to do so, let's take a quick look at Haiti and its history of economic warfare. This history includes the ransom, high interest debt for independence that Haiti was required to pay France in order to be recognized and to participate in the Western system that de-developed the nation for its first 100 years. It includes US banks led by what is now Citibank taking hold of finances of the island towards the end of the 1800s. It involves US Marines invading Haiti in 1915, staying for 19 years, stealing millions of dollars of gold from the Haitian National Bank, and changing the constitution so foreigners could own land. It involves the toppling of Jean-Bertrand d'Aristide in 2004 after he called for France to pay $20 billion in reparations and restitution for the coercive indemnity, which I might add they ridiculed him for in 2002. 15 years later, the New York Times very coincidentally came up with the exact same number when they did their investigation. It includes the Clinton Global Foundation helping to destroy the Haitian rice industry. It includes Hillary Clinton's State Department under Obama threatening action against the Haitian government after garment workers striked and demanded higher minimum wage. It includes the destruction of Petrocaribe, through which Venezuela supported Haiti and other Caribbean islands with inexpensive fuel. It includes the assassination of Jovenel Moïse in 2021 as he refused to remove fuel subsidies like the multinational financial institutions wanted. It includes the core group right in this moment currently working to change the Haitian constitution again to allow foreign multinationals to buy and exploit large land plots. Need I go on? So sanctions and economic warfare are war and death. We must also understand them in this wider perspective because these are all violations of sovereignty. And just a taste of how Haiti is a laboratory for US neocolonial rule that denies sovereignty and self-determination, executed through economic warfare and subterfuge, backed by military force. These same things and more are happening in Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua. For example, in Cuba, currency manipulations and sanctions have been critical in bringing the Cuban economy to its knees, destroying its energy sector, and making it impossible, nearly impossible for the Cuban government to even buy food. So what's visited upon Haiti is planned for the entire hemisphere, and we ignore it at our own peril because the US is piloting its neo-colonial interventionism through things like the Global Fragility Act in Haiti, and through building its desire to build a permanent base in Haiti from which Southcom would operate throughout the entire Caribbean and militarize the Americas. So if we understand the goal of sanctions and unilateral coercive measures as warfare to violate sovereignty, cripple self-determination, and deny our ability to assert collective dignity and humanity, then we can see that appealing to empire and Eurocentric human rights will never end policies that are designed to service imperial domination. As we saw in Syria, sanctions imposed since the beginning of the US-NATO proxy war led to the de-development of the nation and have put 23 million Syrians at the mercy of Western imperialism. Peace will not be legislated or 501c3 funded. It will be struggled for. Another critical aspect of the work of the Zone of Peace is strengthening our Americas-wide shared consciousness of our shared struggle and the need for peace in our hemisphere, our nation, and our neighborhoods here. As I mentioned before, sanctions are a facet of imperialist war, right? Globally and domestically, which is critical because it helps us understand that Black African peoples and communities in the US do not simply suffer from deep inequalities of a racist system, but we constitute an internal colony within this country. We are a captured and colonized people, and our neighborhoods and people are sanctioned. While it may be less direct, we are sanctioned and we are under siege and under warfare. I draw on the words of my comrade in BAP, Baltimore, Erica Keynes, who said, and I quote, "We see sanctions regimes in welfare applications, in food deserts, for-profit healthcare, privatization of our water, power, and internet, low wages, underfunding of public education, lack of affordable housing. All of these things restrict us economically as people," end quote. So defeating sanctions must be part of the broad fight to assert our sovereignty and guarantee our self-determination domestically and globally. We must understand that we must strive to have control over our lives, like the people of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, like we hope for the people of Palestine. So ending sanctions domestically and globally is an imperative in the struggle for human rights. As Malcolm said, the price to make others respect your human rights is death. You have to be ready to die. It is time for you and me now to let the world know how peaceful we are, how well-meaning we are, how law-abiding we wish to be. But at the same time, we have to let the same world know we'll blow their world sky high if we're not respected and recognized and treated the same as other human beings are treated. So when we talk about peace, we are under no illusion, right, that peace will come without conflict or without struggle. In fact, like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, we understand that peace will only come through the defeat of interlocking systems of oppression. And like Malcolm said, we know that at the end of the day, achieving true peace requires resistance by any means necessary and available. And so to close out, I'm gonna quote from BAP's announcement of our North-South Project for People-Centered Human Rights, which launched this morning. I quote, "December 10th, designated as International Human Rights Day, has become a hackneyed, disingenuous ritual in which the United States and European imperialist powers, the main violators of human rights globally over the last 500 years, speciously proclaim their commitment to human rights and what they define as freedom, while simultaneously and continuously subverting democracy, starving, torturing, burning, raping, and imprisoning human beings around the world. The images of Israeli atrocities and what could only be honestly described as a savage rampage against humanity have been justified by US lawmakers with the most execrable racist language that generated nods of agreement from their vile racist allies and governments across all institutions of America, finally stripped away of any semblance of respectability for the white West, while also revealing the moral bankruptcy and hypocrisy that has always been at the core of its civilizing project," end quote. And so for us to understand this and understand sanctions and warfare as a genocidal civilizing project, we also have to root our alternative in people-centered human rights that emanate and address the realities and everyday needs of us as colonized and oppressed people. For those of us in this esteemed church, for those of you watching online, from all of us in our position in the global north, we must focus our efforts on building collective, coordinated, organized power to destroy this genocidal, civilizing project and build a new alternative. The destruction, de-development, and death that has been wrought on the people of Palestine, Syria, the Congo, Zimbabwe, Eritrea, Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, Southeast DC, Northeast DC, Mississippi, Alabama, Cleveland, Ohio, all over the world. That genocidal project that has come for Palestinians and Gazans today is coming for us all as well. We practice solidarity because we understand that their struggle is our struggle, that our liberation is one and the same, that ethnic cleansing in Gaza functions under the same logic as gentrification and economic exploitation that has displaced and dislocated people in Washington, D.C. So to counter that logic, we must unite in an anti-colonial struggle that will break this capitalistic system, and we must build decolonial communal institutions and relationships based in people-centered human rights. That is our struggle, one we must not only be willing to die for, but we must be prepared to live for. Hasta la victoria siempre venceremos. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Our next speaker is Ayad Kishawi, a Palestinian activist who grew up in Lebanon, whose family is from Gaza and Jaffa in Palestine, also a member of the coordinating committee of Al-Auda, Palestinian Right of Return Coalition, and a member of the Alternative Palestinian Revolutionary Path movement. Ayad was on the steering committee of the People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism, sanctions, and coercive economic measures. You have the floor, Ayad.
Thank you very much, Jill. And thank you to all the organizers of this wonderful event. I was asked to present on the findings of the People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism, blockades, economic coercive measures, and sanctions. But first, I want to say I'm really honored to be in the presence of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. We stand in principled solidarity with Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the African peoples in the Americas, and the first peoples of the Americas. As we see this U.S. empire declines, the global South coalesces, as we are doing right here in this hall today. And we are saddened and often demoralized by events like what happened in Syria. And yes, the resistance will be reborn and reincarnated over and over again. But the resistance in Palestine, in Gaza, the West Bank, and even in Palestine 48, the resistance in Lebanon, the resistance in Yemen, the resistance in Iraq, the resistance in Iran, and soon the resistance in Syria are all alive and well. Before I even begin, I just want to say that, yes, we have been experiencing genocide for close to a century in Palestine, but sanctions are the new form of genocide. Pastor Lamar, who spoke about Sankofa and Randall and the US empire and the struggle, also make me honored to be speaking to an audience at the Metropolitan AME. It is a center that fought slavery, gave shelter and aid to runaway slaves, and truly stands on the shoulders of giants. Those who are standing today continue to struggle in contemporary forms by providing health education, fighting for civil rights, and most importantly, providing a spiritual and political home to the African peoples in the US who are targets of state violence, imperialism, and oppression. The International People's Tribunal on US imperialism, sanctions, blockades, and economic coercive measures approaches economic coercive measures as inherently violent, designed to maintain economic inequality, continue the theft of wealth from the global south, and preserve racial hierarchy in the international system. Since the end of the Cold War, the world has witnessed an unprecedented proliferation of a sanctions regime, particularly by the UN Security Council, the European Union, and the United States. This is due in part to the collapse of the Soviet Union, which ended the deadlock between superpowers at the Security Council and ushered in an era of US military, political, and economic hegemony, one that is now facing substantial challenges, and we could argue the beginning of its defeat. Over the past few decades, sanctions were slowly reconfigured from wartime weapons into purported peacetime policy instruments. We have found that economic coercive measures are an illegal use of force that violates the rule of non-intervention in the United Nations Charter. We have found that economic coercive measures constitute a war crime and a crime against humanity. We have found that economic coercive measures are designed to destroy the economies of formerly colonized global South nations and make them subservient to the US and its partners. We have found that perpetrators of economic coercive measures are guilty of fraud, piracy, conversion, and colonial theft. We found that the perpetrators of economic coercive measures are guilty of the crime of apartheid under the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. And here we invoke Gaza and Palestine specifically. The perpetrators of economic coercive measures are guilty of the crimes of genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, and attempt to commit genocide under the Convention and the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Lastly, we have found that economic coercive measures are illegal under international human rights law. We see this as part of a war doctrine that Rumsfeld has pioneered. If we return to the US repeated attacks on Iraq, we notice that as the US lost the war, it trended towards expanding the war to include Syria, Lebanon, and attempts to draw on Iran, entrenched ethnic and sectarian conflict among peoples who lived in harmony for centuries, and to start the policy of endless wars. The objective was not to achieve political transformation through a decisive military victory, but rather wage a hybrid war of attrition through external attacks, internal destabilization through mercenaries and proxies, and lastly, impose suffocating sanctions to starve the people, to alienate them from the forces conflicting with US empire. This is precisely what we are witnessing in Syria today, after the Zionist entity was humiliated in both Palestine and Lebanon. The expansion of the attacks targeted Yemen, Iraq, and Iran. All these countries including Iran, are brutally sanctioned with economic coercive measures. Yet the axis of resistance responded with unprecedented coordination and steadfast unity. The US went back to awaken its proxies and Al-Qaeda offshoots, such as the Sham Liberation Council, the Free Syrian Army, ISIS, and even gave one to its sworn enemies a facelift to interview on CNN. These are nihilist gangs, and they are not unlike the Haganah and the Irgun that were financed by Europe to conquer Palestine and terrorize its inhabitants. As I move to Palestine, I will not speak about the ongoing genocide of Gaza now, but rather focus on the work we did at the Tribunal. I lost close to 100 relatives in the genocide, but the real numbers are yet to be determined. Gaza, a sanctioned-off enclave of Palestinian refugees, is under blockade, destroyed, and 2 out of the 2.3 million people have been forced out of their homes, only to be bombed again and again in their tents in otherwise protected areas, such as the courtyards of destroyed hospitals and schools. We held the hearing on Gaza as it was being bombed on May 13th, 2023. This is well before October 7th. The witnesses had to pause several times as their buildings were being struck, targeted by airstrikes. Our 2 most eloquent witnesses, Yasser al-Dirawi, a human rights lawyer, and Wafa al-Udaini, a journalist, were later martyred with their families in targeted assassinations during the subsequent genocide. Gaza has been subject to a land, air, and sea siege since 2006. Every Palestinian is a target. There has been systematic subjugation against all Palestinians, and half of the population is children. In 2007, when Hamas became the governing authority of Gaza, Israeli authorities implemented a policy of total closure, restricting all passage of goods and people through Gaza's land crossings, other than tightly circumscribed exceptional cases. The closure of Gaza comes within a settler colonial and apartheid context, as well as the context of Israel's frequent military assaults on Gaza. Israeli occupation forces occupied the Gaza Strip in 1967. In 2005, the occupation army implemented a so-called disengagement plan to withdraw from one side, while retaining control over the borderlines in Gaza, with Gaza. In doing so, Zionist forces control Palestinian access to the sea and its airspace. After 2007, they imposed strict controls on the Gaza Strip, after declaring the Gaza Strip a hostile entity as Hamas won legitimately the elections. These measures entail the imposition of restrictions on the entry of goods and products into the sector, including fuel and industrial diesel for the Gaza power plants, raw materials, equipment, and spare parts. In the interest of time, I can tell you in summary that the effect of the closures on Gaza impacted medicine, impacted medical devices and imaging, access to healthcare, access to movement, and the contamination of the water supply of Gaza in its totality. I will now move and say a few words about Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. As we see the actions of Yemen in blocking the Red Sea, even after emerging of decade-long war, as we see Iraq striking targets from under the occupation of the US in the occupied Syrian Golan, and Lebanon targeting the Zionist military installation along the border, as well as Iran's series of True Promise operations, we are reminded of the heroic Cuban troops in Angola, who in 1988 broke the back of South African apartheid in Quito, Cuanavale. This little island bordering Florida was subject to so many deadly sanctions and economic coercive measures, in addition to many invasions and coup attempts. The Cuban people not only exported liberation, but also development, medicine, doctors, and innovative knowledge. One cannot understand the Cuban Revolution and political economic system outside of the legacies and ongoing realities of colonialism and imperialism. By necessity and out of ideological and political commitments, anti-imperialism has been central. The pre-1959 economy was controlled by US imperialism through the imposition of the Platt Amendment in 1903, which reduced the Cuban economy to a myth and sovereignty. Cuba's countryside was characterized by latifundia system dominated by US firms and the supremacy of sugarcane in a plantation economy. Trade relations were shaped by unequal exchange. And then there was the degrading tourism industry that was controlled by the American mafia. After the 1958 Cuban Revolution, the transition to socialism inevitably meant the confrontation with US imperialism and invasions, attempted coups, and the imposition of sanctions on Cuba. The blockades on Cuba today limit Cuba's purchasing capacity for any product or raw material if it contains 10% or more of its components or ownership originating from the United States. These are suffocating sanctions. Although Obama restored bilateral ties with Cuba and brought their respective missions to full embassies, the Trump administration reversed this opening and notably reinstated Cuba's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism and extended the sanctions that penalize individuals and countries involved in specific trade with Cuba. More than 240 measures, and Biden didn't change that policy. Biden continued with that policy. More than 240 measures activated as part of the embargo by the Trump administration were kept in place during the COVID pandemic, exacerbating the economic health crises. There are 90 resolutions by elected bodies, city councils, county commissions, state legislators, school boards, labor unions, representing an estimated total of 45 million people demanding to lift the sanctions on Cuba. The National Network on Cuba stated that Cuba is actually a state sponsor of peace rather than terrorism. Brothers and sisters, I ran out of time. There is so much material in the tribunal that really involves some details from Nicaragua. I just want to say that Nicaragua recently filed a case in the ICJ against the German sponsorship of the Zionist genocide against our people, and that needs to be acknowledged. And the Zionists are going after Nicaragua, demanding it be listed as its state sponsor of terror. And as for Venezuela, the US makes a mockery of the rule-based order. Over and over again, the Venezuelan people go to the polls, they elect their president, and the US president appoints a president for Venezuela, such as Juan Guaido in one instance, or Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia in another, all within a farcical claim that the people of Venezuela don't have the right to elect their leadership, while they steal the most important resource of the Venezuelan people, and that is the Citgo enterprise, a total market cap of $13 billion. In conclusion, the witnesses have provided ample evidence attesting to the historic and ongoing responsibility of the United States for repeated, concerted attempts to undermine the sovereignty of the peoples discussed and states through military intervention, economic disruption, political subversion, and social dislocation. These efforts have profoundly impacted the physical and psychological health and well-being of the populations, compromised the integrity of the country's political systems, and turned the institutions of the international community against the peoples. The United States bears tremendous responsibility for its criminal actions perpetrated against Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. No one has yet been adequately held accountable. Our efforts must run up this tally so that when the global South prevails, and we will prevail, our respective invoices for reparations are clearly documented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan Kashani. Before we go further, we want to warmly welcome listeners on WPFW and thank WPFW here in Washington, D.C. for airing tonight's program, for carrying it forward into the future. There's a few other ways in which tonight's program, along with all of us here and all of you who are tuning in on Zoom, Wilton Voigt is making a podcast that really air extensively on a number of college radio stations and others on Other Voices, Other Choices. Tonight's program is being streamed to the Sanctions Kill Facebook. It will be on UNAC Peace YouTube channel after tonight's meeting. That's United National Anti-War Coalition. And we want to give special thanks to the folks who are really knocking themselves out to do the technical work for tonight. Joe Lombardo of UNAC, who helped to set up the Zoom, and Ted Kelly, Natalia from AFGJ, Ted Kelly, who's doing this, I think, from San Diego. Really, this is a national and an international effort to get out voices in cooperation on this program. In introducing the next speaker, we did want to remind everyone here who might be available tomorrow evening to join us at 6 p.m. at 16th Street and H for a rally to demand that President Biden take Cuba off the state sponsor of terrorism list. It's called the SSOT. We all know who the state sponsors of terrorism are, that really wreak terror on the entire world, and how dare they use it as a charge and a crime in starving down other countries. So our speaker by Zoom, we're very honored, is Alejandro Garcia del Toro, who is the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Cuba to the U.S. He's going to be talking about people-centered human rights in Cuba. And especially, I want to take note that he had planned to be here tonight and is really quite close by, but U.S. always manages to continually harass and pressure with the thugs that they organize, the missions that are legitimately here, and particularly the Cuba mission. So we continue to defend Cuba in every way. There's a petition in the back. It's part of what will be presented tomorrow. Please do make a point of signing online and signing here tonight. So Ambassador Alejandro Garcia del Toro, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all friends that are in the church, that are online today. It's a huge pleasure for the Embassy of Cuba and for me to talk a little bit for you on this event, talking about the human rights and talking about the impact of sanctions in the life, in the normal life of the Cuban people and in the functioning of the Cuban government as a whole. Many friends have mentioned before about what Cuba has done in Africa, what Cuba has done in solidarity actions around the world for 6 decades, despite of the impact on our economy of the sanctions by the US, and the impact of the not only the bilateral trade or commerce or economic links between Cuba and the US, but the impact of the economic and trade relation between Cuba and the rest of the world. Because for 6 decades, and mainly in the last 30 years, the extraterritorial impacts of the sanctions by the US has been huge, has been very dramatic, and even with a lot of transactions, a lot of financial movement between Cuba and the rest of the world, on an economic links that have no any point of contact with the U.S. soil, those relations has been very difficult to run by the Cuban government in order to sustain our normal social and economic life because of the U.S. sanctions, because of the extraterritorial implications of the U.S. blockade. All of you know about the impact of the Helms-Burton Law that was enacted in 1996, which forced each American diplomat around the world, in each capital in which an American embassy is placed, have to conduct normal work to put obstacles to the economic and trade relation between Cuba and the country in which that American diplomat is working. And so that's part of the US law. And that has a lot of connections with the issue of human rights, because all the economic functioning of our country, all the dynamic on trade, all the normal development of our economy is connected or is aimed to sustain the free healthcare, is aimed to guarantee the enough financial resources to sustain the free access to education from pre-K to a university with no cost, and in the same of the healthcare system, which in all the three levels of the system, from the preventive action to the more specific action at the third level in hospital, all is designed to give the full population, the whole population of Cuba, with a very good healthcare attention. But all those services are very difficult to sustain if the government have a lot of problem to have enough financial resources, either to sustain the technological equipments in each of the hospital, in each of the clinic at the municipality, at the neighborhood level. As part of the panelists, I see my friend Samira Adri, who, when she is in a panel here in the US, I could say that nobody can be more as effective Cuban diplomat than Samira, because she knows very well how the healthcare system works. She knows very well how much difficult, how much obstacle the sanctions by the US impose on the normal functioning of the healthcare system in Cuba. So we cannot talk about human rights issues in Cuba without talking about the 6 decades of the most comprehensive, longest, and cruelest scheme of sanctions that any country have even imposed the Cuban on any country around the world. Even when we talk about imposing maybe sanctions by one country to other country, but in this case, it's 6 decades of sanctions imposed by the most powerful economy around the world, the largest army around the world, the strongest GDP of the world, a very huge country with a lot of a population of more than 300 million of people, against a very teeny island in the Caribbean Sea, very close to the US, with an open economy for 6 decades. So it's impossible to talk about how much impact the sanctions have had on the Cuban people, on the human right of the Cuban people, because of the impact of those sanctions. It's normal that in the U.S. media they used to talk a lot about the lack of political freedoms, about the not having in Cuba a multi-party system, not having free elections in the way that the United States understands the free election in a country when million and million of citizens are prohibited to vote because any different reasons as part of the political battle among the political system in the US. It's very easy for the US media to attack about the human rights in Cuba because the supposed lack of possibility of people for free speech. And we have a lot of examples here in the US about the lack of freedom of speech. So what is clear, referring to sanctions by the US against the Cuban people, is that what the revolution has done in 6 decades is really a sort of a very heroic action, given the reality that we have done all of those things in a very difficult political, economical, and trade relation with the US. All of you know that on 1959, the Cuban economy, maybe the 90% of the Cuban economy was under control of the US. All the functioning of the Cuban trade was connected to depending on the sugar quota, and in a sudden, all those dynamic were cut by the Eisenhower administration, later by the Kennedy administration, with the idea to topple the Cuban government. All of you, it's usually is very reiterated the memorandum by Lester Mallory, but it's always important to repeat what that American official wrote in 1960, just advising the White House, advising the Department of State to do whatever action, what a high standard of measures or sanctions against the Cuban government in order to dismantle the Cuban economy, in order to get the people stressed, to get the people upset with the government, in order to get the people out to the streets, to topple the Cuban government, to topple the government of Fidel Castro at that time, just because with the goal to put the people against the Cuban government, just the getting as less support, at less effectiveness of the salary of the Cuban population, in order to really create the kind of economic and psychological distress in the population to topple the government. And that was in 1960, but that has been, and that is the same principle and the same goal that we have seen today, even in the last 3 or 4 years of the Biden administration, an administration that promised, a president that promised in a 2019 campaign event in Florida that he would restore what Obama did during the administration in which he was the vice president, but that never happened. So even the Biden administration had the thinking and had the idea that would be possible to topple the Cuban government just with the tools of putting pressure, or of putting stress, of putting difficulties on the normal life of the Cuban population. And that is one of the things that maybe have been more impacting the real human rights of the Cuban people. I just want to thank because of, by the organization, by the people who organized this panel, for the possibility to invite the Embassy of Cuba to this panel. It's an honor for me to be joined by the Nicaraguan ambassador, the Vice Minister of Venezuelan Bolivarian Republic to this event. As I mentioned before, be joining again with my friend Samira Adri for the possibility of talking to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chief of Mission, Alejandro Garcia del Toro. I'd next like to introduce our special friend, Ambassador Latora Sandino, representative of Nicaragua to the U.S., talking about people-centered human rights in Nicaragua. And I will add that Ambassador Sandino is very determined that the Nicaragua embassy here in DC will become a people's center for resistance and the defense of human rights.
Thank you. In the first place, I want to extend greeting from President Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo to all the participants on this forum, as well as to each one of your families. We hope that next year we will be a year of victories for all of us. It's something that it is quite important at this time. I want to thank the organizer of this forum for giving us the opportunity to share with you the efforts of our good government in Nicaragua that is making to overcome poverty and building an ever more just and egalitarian society, which will allow us to achieve the economic and human development which all the Nicaraguan people deserve. I believe that this forum helps to break the information blockade that corporate media has imposed not only on Nicaragua, but on all the countries and peoples of the world that have chosen the path of dignity, independence, and sovereignty. Fundamental values that are inherent in all human beings. Dear brothers and sisters, today we commemorate International Human Rights Day, as was established by United Nations. And we recall that human rights are a set of fundamental rights and freedoms that all people are entitled to simply for being human beings that are universal. That means that we are entitled to them regardless of nationality, race, sex, religion, language, ethnic origins, or any other conditions. In the Sandinista Nicaragua, when we talk about human rights, we talk about restoration of rights. Let me repeat that, restoration of rights. We talk about a set of policies and regulations that seeks to reinstate rights that has been violated for a majority of the populations. In other words, the poor. When we talk about restatement of rights, we are talking about a comprehensive process of reparations that returns to the people the opportunity to live as individuals, fully enjoying their rights. In other words, we are returning to the Nicaraguan people rights that have been taken away from them by right-wing governments that, with foreign assistance and financing, put on hold all the democratic and social model that we are achieving through the Sandinista People Revolution. Dear comrades, compañeras, and compañeros, Nicaragua has made progress in restoring rights in various areas, such as education, health, gender equality, and housing. In this context, 60% of the national budget is spent on economic program and social policies programs to fight poverty. Social spending on health, education, and citizen safety represent about 54.6% of the budget that ensure, for example, healthcare and education is free of charge. It means improvement to school buildings and hospital infrastructure, as well as technology for health and education, sport, recreation, and culture. The government of Nicaragua has worked to ensure that education is free of charge, of high quality, and that is inclusive, equitable, and intercultural. The Nicaraguan government guarantees the right to healthcare, which is a fundamental pillar of the public policies. In 2021, the national budget for health increased. Up to now, 27 hospitals have been built, state-of-art hospitals. That is a new word that I learned today. State-of-art. I like it. That's the kind of hospital we have. State-of-art. In addition, 225 health centers and 454 health posts have been developed. Maternity homes have increased from 80 to 25 that have allowed us to reduce very big the infant death in Nicaragua. There are about 90 homes of care for people with special needs, 18 transit center, natural medicine, clinics, epidemiology, laboratories, any kind of things that you can imagine, because that is important. If you want to develop the country, health has to be guaranteed for everybody. In 2014, a constitutional reform established gender equality in terms, for instance, of candidates for running for office. 50% of the candidates to be elected must be women. And that is one thing that is marvelous. The government managed in the restitution and strengthening of women's rights had allowed international organizations to highlight Nicaragua as a country with extraordinary and consistent progress in reducing gender inequalities, positioning among the first 6 countries with the greatest gender equality in the world. International Prize Gender Equality and Women Empowerment in Latin America has been given also to Nicaragua. In 17 years, 135,583 new and improved homes has been built, with an annual average of 7,965 homes, representing a fourfold increase in relation to the period of the neoliberal government. In order to achieve these results, reform has been made to the legal framework, expanding the amount of subsidies for house of social interest from $1,850 for each family to $1,300 that the government give to the people, to the families, in order to facilitate access to affordable houses for the vulnerable segments of our society. Efforts that we have done in sovereignty and nutrition and security, we have been able to reach about 90% of sovereignty, food sovereignty. We have been increasing the involvement of farmers and producers from, for instance, in 2006, there were about 250,000 people involved in farming, but by 2022, the number had increased to 265,000. This allows us an increase of the production of food in 124% if we compare it to 2006. Education is important, the defense of Mother Earth, all of those things are part of the programs in order to restore and to restore human rights for the Nicaraguan populations. I want to put a little emphasis in one thing, and that is the law of autonomy in Nicaragua. The law of autonomy statute, the autonomy for the regions of the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua that was approved back in 1987. This law symbolized the recognition of the ancestral rights of indigenous and Afro-descendant people as a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multilingual communities in the country. 1/3 of the national territory has been titled to the indigenous and Afro-Caribbean people of the eastern third of the nation. That is certainly quite remarkable. For the Nicaraguan Caribbean coast, the Statute of Autonomy contributes to the promotion of values of social coexistence, fraternity, equality, freedom, and respect among people. Likewise, the right to live and to develop under their own form of social organization, manage local affairs, maintain communal forms of ownership of their land as an exercise of self-determination and conserve both their tradition and customs as well of the linguistic richness that they already have. Dear brothers and sisters, I encourage you to continue your solidarity and support for Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, to break the imperialist media blockade that seeks to hide the truth about the important victories we have obtained in social, economic, cultural, and policy spheres. We invite you to visit Nicaragua and see the reality by yourself. Please come. You are most welcome. And of course, and first of all, in this time, I encourage you to never stop your active solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Palestine and to help stop the genocide of the Zionist rulers. Thank you very much.
To acknowledge, first of all, thank you so much, Ambassador Sandino. Some of those figures, we should really make sure we publish, get out widely. Quite an accomplishment. Quite an accomplishment. Before introducing the next speaker, we wanted to give special thanks for, if you're listening, if you've registered for tonight, so special thanks to Michelle Elner, Code Pink, America's Without Sanctions, and to for the Eventbrite link, and to Jennifer Cantor for really helping to work on that. And also to Cheryl Labash of the National Network on Cuba for the publicity, and really makes a difference. For Jerry Condon, who's with us here from the West Coast, from Veterans for Peace. Thank you. And Scott Hagman, who's really helped pull together the tables. And you should really check out the beautiful materials and the tables in the back. So our next speaker, and he travels so widely, and we often see him here and in New York, but he'll be speaking from Venezuela. It is the Deputy Foreign Minister, Carlos Ron, of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and he will be addressing people-centered human rights in Venezuela. So, Carlos Ron, it's an honor to have you here.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm very happy to see everyone in this gathering, and of course to be able to share this panel with our comrades of Cuba and Nicaragua, as we are all struggling for a very difficult fight, which is to show the world that this narrative, this constant narrative about human rights, the instrumentalization of human rights by imperialism, has no reason and has to be defeated. Because on a day like today, where we are called on to remember the importance of human rights, what we need to do first and foremost is reject the political use of human rights, the manipulation that is employed with the term of human rights to attack countries, to violate the human rights of entire nations, entire populations, to commit crimes against humanity by illegally sanctioning countries, entire countries, just in order to coerce those countries into following what the United States foreign policy has thought out for them. We have to reclaim the term human rights for progressive, for humanist purposes, because that's really what it's all about. And I first start, by saying, speaking from the Venezuelan experience, the Bolivarian revolution, the government that is today led by President Nicolás Maduro, and the government that comes from the process started by President Hugo Chavez, is a government that is born out of the struggle for human rights, in defense of human rights. When I was a child in 1989, we saw one of the greatest human rights violations in this country, because neoliberal policies were enacted on February of 1989. World Bank and IMF structural adjustment program was imposed upon the population, creating difficult hardships on a population that was already more than over 50% living in some state of poverty, and it was forced to take measures of structural adjustment that created riots, where people were really protesting and trying to get food. I mean, the riots that took place in Caracas of 1989, prior to the revolution, were people going to the streets to find food, to find things that were needed for everyday life. And the response from the state, the response from a U.S. ally, which was the government of Venezuela at that time, the response from the state was to defend the rights or the privileges, rather, of the elite, of the business class, of foreign interests. And what took place officially to this day, officially, the count that they recorded was about 293 people dead, but there was over 3,000 bodies that were eventually found in mass graves and other type of things. And I'm not talking about a human rights violation that is exclusive to Venezuelan history. All of Latin America has witnessed at one point or another gross human rights violations. So what are we? We are the children. We are the generation that rose to political in our political stance against these human rights violations. So now, processes like the one in Cuba, like the one in Nicaragua, that have tried to guarantee housing, to guarantee food, to guarantee access to medicine, to guarantee education. Now they're criticized, or now they're being accused of violating human rights, when in fact what we have done all along this time is try to guarantee those rights that were denied to us by the elites. I have to say that I was asked to speak about what we have done, and I think it's not about numbers and figures that we can we can jot them down, and although they may be very remarkable, the point is, what is more interesting is the conception of human rights. The conception that first of all, that the understanding that in the three generations of human rights that we have in history, the first being the elemental political rights, the right to life, and so forth, the ones that came from basically from the French Revolution. The second being the generation of social and economic rights, the right to have access to food, to medicine, to housing. And then the third generation, those collective rights, those rights of collectivity, the rights to live in peace, to the rights to development, the rights where for solidarity to take place. We have to understand that what imperialism promotes and talks about is only the form of that first generation of rights, some sort of political rights, some sort of civil rights, which even in their own countries in the country like the United States, there's a difficulty to guarantee the simple rights to vote, the simple rights for non-discrimination and so forth. The countries that have started revolutions in Latin America, like Cuba, like Nicaragua, like Venezuela, have gone beyond those political rights. We have those political rights. We have rights to participate. We have democracies that have developed even a deeper sense that the every conventional liberal model. But we also understood that it is important to guarantee the social rights. During the Bolivarian Revolution, before the onslaught of the illegal sanctions by the US, Venezuela had eradicated hunger. I mean, it was one of the 18 countries that had achieved the UN goals for hunger eradication. Venezuela reduced poverty and extreme poverty. Venezuela created access to potable water, decreased the inequality, increased human development index, increased employment, eradicated illiteracy. All three countries, by the way, have eradicated illiteracy. We can't say that of the United States, or we can't say that of other countries in the so-called developed world. We increase school enrollment, we increase GDP, protein consumption, we decrease infant mortality, we increase access to technology, access to specialized hospitals, which, by the way, were the product in many of the cases here in Venezuela, were the products of direct cooperation between Cuba and Venezuela, showing the world that two countries can relate to each other on the basis of solidarity, on the basis of cooperation, of complementarity, and not on the basis of competition, like the free trade agreement area wanted us to do. This is what we have shown the world, that you can guarantee, in a common effort, you can guarantee rights. Today, Venezuela moves towards a horizon, what we've called the communal horizon, because what we're building, what President Chavez left us as the model for our democracy, is the communal democracy. This year alone, we have had 2 elections where people in the communes, which are territories that where there's a specific direct democratic participation and organization, where assemblies make decisions that affect the community. Well, this year we had 2 elections that where the community has chosen which project to prioritize in their own territory. See, people will talk about the presidential election, and that, of course, is an important election. It's an election where we ratified this project, but they don't talk about the elections where we have ratified, the idea that the communities have a say on what their development should be like. And this in and of itself is a new way of guaranteeing rights, of guaranteeing human rights, because when you take rights down to the communal level, where you as a state give the support, give the resources to people making direct choices on things that of their concern, where they can choose what is the main necessity for them at that point in time, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a school, whether it's repairing a street, then you really are allowing rights to be defended, rights to be guaranteed, because you're not just placing people's concerns into a whole void of necessities and of bureaucracy. You're actually taking decision making down to the people's level, and then you're allowing the people to organize and make happen what they need to happen in order to guarantee their access to whatever necessities they have. That is the philosophy of the communes. That is the philosophy that President Maduro is pushing forward. That we in Venezuela, our popular organizations, are organizing to support. Because one thing that I think is important and is also valid for Venezuela's model, and it's that we cannot achieve, we wouldn't be able to achieve any of these transformations if we didn't have the combination of a strong leadership with a political will to transform society and an organized society at the same time that can take these opportunities, can take these resources, that can take these changes and actually carry out the transformation. Because you know what, the most important thing about Venezuelan's transformation during the Bolivarian Revolution in these last 25 years is that everyone plays a part. Everyone is an active participant in their own transformation of life. It's not something that comes from above. It's not something that is given. It's something that you build together with a government that has the political will to enact it. So this, my friends, this is what we defend. This is why we talk about the necessity of reclaiming human rights for the progressive cause, for the revolutionary causes. This is why we have to defeat the lies of imperialism that only sees human rights when it's convenient and when it's something that is going to support their economic interests. Human rights is bringing the true defense of rights down to the decision making of the people, to direct decision making, and that is what we're trying to build. Thank you very much, comrades. This is always a wonderful opportunity because to be able to share this with you, because we know that part of this of solidarity also involves that we be able to discuss this together, and that that from our revolutions, from Venezuela, from the communes of Venezuela, from the revolutionary government in Venezuela, we support all the actions that you as social movements and organizations in the United States do to fight imperialism and to fight these atrocities. We know that you need our solidarity as well, and you can always count on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Carlos Ron. And I apologize that our program's going a little late, but I just want to acknowledge a couple of more people in the room. Elan and Petros have great information for you about the Black Alliance for Peace. And I'm just talking about resources right now for you to stay in the struggle and give that solidarity that we're committing to. Cheryl Lavash of the National Network on Cuba can help connect you to Cuba work if you're not already, if you could raise your hand. We have Nan McCurdy here, who can help connect you to the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. And we have Leonardo Flores here. Oh, Nan, could you raise your hand so everyone can see where to find you? And Leonardo Flores can help connect people to the Venezuela Solidarity Network. And Joe Lombardo is here and can help connect you to the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. And I think everyone else has been mentioned. I've asked, Dr. Samira Adri to be very brief, but she understands that we have interpreters that have to go home, and WPFW needs to go to their next program. But Dr. Samira Adri, as our program says, was educated at the Latin American School of Medicine in Cuba. She's part of the organization that I come from that had the idea to have an Americas Without Sanctions campaign, which is Friends of Latin America. And she has a few brief words to close tonight's program with.
Good evening to everyone gathered here tonight and all who are online. Yes, this has been a powerful event. I want to thank everyone who put it together. It's not been easy, and there's more to come. But I think you all have heard the call that it is clear that sanctions are a detrimental tool to humanity's progress, and they must be eliminated. There are just a few things that I wanted to mention. Number one, when we think of human rights, we need to understand that it's been created by a group of people historically that excluded a lot of us. It's not a surprise that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came in the year that the Nakba started, 1948. And in that year that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was developed, much of the world's countries were not yet independent. They were colonized. So this concept of colonizers sitting at a table, writing beautiful words that are supposed to apply to every human being when they do not really and truly consider the rest of the world humans is something that we need to reassess. It has been said time and time again. I'm not saying anything new. Black Alliance for Peace, I believe the national coordinator, Jamu Baraka, has mentioned this, that we have to rework this whole idea of human rights and center ourselves more on people-centered human rights, because that is what that's what takes humanity into account. This framework that we keep promoting, unfortunately, is very exclusionary. We've seen what has played out with this genocide. We've seen what has played out with all these sanctions from Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, all the countries that are sanctioned, Zimbabwe, Haiti, everybody goes to the UN to demand that sanctions end. But what happens? The paradigm, the framework of the United Nations is already rotten. It's already faulty. It must be gutted out. It must be reworked to include all of our voices, and not just all of us who are now supposedly free, because not everybody is free. And that is why we're here. If it wasn't for the fact that the horrors of the genocide that are occurring on a daily continue to infringe on the human right to life and the sacredness of life being neglected at a grotesque level, we would not be here tonight. The sanctions that we've talked about, they were explicit. In 1919, I think Woodrow Wilson was the one describing what the intention of a sanctions paradigm or concept was. It's to basically be a silent tool of death, bring people to their knees, to be subjugated, to be dominated by other peoples. It is not a tool for anybody to use to their fellow brother and sister in mankind. But yet here we are, over a century later, still talking about sanctions and how this same concept is set up to put us against each other and to dictate who can live and who can die, who is worthy of living. The sanctions that we've been talking about that violate human rights are violations of access to everyday necessities. We talk about what's happening in Gaza, where electricity is cut off for 20 hours a day. We talk about what's happening now in Cuba, where because of resisting the blockade for over 6 decades, they are now having to rotate blackouts because the infrastructure is old, because the parts will not get to the island because they're restricted. They cannot do financial transactions. They cannot do this. They cannot do that because of sanctions. And so people have to live in darkness, literally. People have to live in moments of spreads of diseases that could be avoided if they had fuel to run water pumps, to clean sanitation, water sanitation stations, to grow food and to distribute food so everybody has something to eat. These are the egregious violations of human rights that are not being addressed on the World's Forum. These are what we are being held hostage to allow and tolerate. It cannot be. It cannot be tolerated because we know that right here in the belly of the beast, we are also suffering our forms of sanctions because the government decides that it is only a few who deserve to live and live well. And I, as a physician trained in the paradigm of health is a human right, I cannot give access or healthcare to somebody unless they have money to pay. That is not what health is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be a for-profit system. So for me, I think it is very important because each and every one of us in this room and on this call, one thing we can all identify with is how health at some point in time has compromised our lives. We've been affected at some point. Now just imagine how you can intentionally deprive people of access to care in Gaza and the rest of Palestine because the occupier has to give permits to people, whether they can go get a doctor's appointment. And aside from that, they're blowing up all the hospitals. They're killing people on their hospital beds. Where Cuba is struggling to center its meager resources to keep hospitals and clinics running, people in their neighborhoods have to rotate in darkness just to keep hospitals running. Those doctors have to keep going to work, even though their houses may not have electricity, they still gotta go to work because Cubans, like Gazans, like Venezuelans, like Nicaraguans, who are trained in the medicine of healing, do not leave their patients to die. We have to challenge and resist in the same way Nicaragua has been resisting, despite having to deal with a history of US intentionally meddling in their lives. With years of civil war that devastated the people, destroyed Nicaragua, but they fought and they won. Even when they had to lose a moment to neoliberal forces, they came back. It is our duty to support the Nicaraguan revolution, just as it is our duty to support the Venezuelan revolution, which is being so strong, despite all the aggression enacted upon it. Venezuela was there for Cuba. It's because of Venezuela that for quite a while, Cuba could continue to resist the aggression of the US sanctions and the blockade. But now Venezuela has to deal with frozen assets, limitations in transporting and exporting their fuel, a country that is full of natural resources. That is much of the history of the world. We come from continents where we are endowed with natural resources that are supposed to be enough for everybody to live well. But instead, we have the oligarchy running around, pitting us against each other and devastating our lives, our environment, and our future. We must come to a point where we recenter and understand that resistance is the only way we are going to make a viable future for this world. Please. So I say, free Palestine. And the blockade on Cuba. And the blockade on Venezuela. And the sanctions on Nicaragua and all other of the 40 countries in the world that are suffering under sanctions right now. Viva la revolución, hasta la victoria siempre.
Online, I think maybe it's just those of us in the room now, but we do have a song for you that the chorus is going to sing from a Venezuelan singer-songwriter, Ali Primera, and it's on the lyrics are on the back of your program. No basta rezar. It's not enough to pray. There's a lot that we have to do to build peace.
Microphones are working, but this last song we want to share with everybody is an invitation to organize, to go out, to speak out. Because sometimes we just stay sitting down and praying for the world to change, but praying is not enough, and that is what this song is. Something more to do beyond. Okay, so let's Everybody say, no basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. No, no basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. Everybody, no basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. Y rezan de buena fe, y rezan de corazón, pero también reza el piloto cuando montan el avión para ir a bombardear a los niños del Irak, para ir a bombardear a los niños del Irak. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. Nada se puede lograr si no hay corrupción. Reza el rico, reza el amo y te maltratan al peón. Reza el rico, reza el amo y te maltratan al peón. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. No cosas conseguir la paz. En el mundo no habrá paz mientras haya explotación del hombre por el hombre y exista desigualdad. Del hombre por el hombre y exista desigualdad. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. Cuando el pueblo se levante y que todo cambiar, y ustedes dirán conmigo, no bastaba con rezar. Ustedes dirán conmigo, no bastaba con rezar. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. No basta rezar. Gracias.